In this tutorial, we'll be going through how to set up and use app service deployment slots. So this is a feature of Azure App Service web apps. It's called deployment slots, and it allows you to have multiple environments set up for your web app, each with their own separate host name. So you can have a staging environment and you can have a production environment. So when you want to make a change to your production environment, you can deploy your changes to the staging environment first. You can check out those changes on your staging environment URL. And if you're happy with that and you want to move that stuff into your production environment, you can swap your slots between staging and production. Now that's useful because you can revert those changes if you need to. If you need to roll back, you can revert back to the previous version of production straight away. And it eliminates the downtime when you're deploying into production as well. So that's another key benefit there for using deployment slots. So we'll cover how to set up and use those deployment slots for Azure App Service. We'll start by creating the Azure resources that we need via the Azure CLI. So we'll create the resource group first, then we'll create the service plan and then the web app. So let's get started with that now. Start by creating the resource group. Next, we'll create the app service plan. One thing with the app service plan, you need to make sure you use a standard, premium, or isolated app service plan tier. If you don't use those, you can't use deployment slots. And the different tiers, they have a different maximum amount of deployment slots available. So there's a link in the blog post that talks about app service limits. You might want to check that out and you can get an idea as to how many deployment slots you can get for each of the different plan tiers that you can select from. So I'm using this premium app service plan tier P0v3 for the SKU when I'm creating this app service plan. So now we'll create the web app, and I'm going over this quick because I've done it in a previous post and YouTube tutorial before. So this will be a Node.js application and it's running on a Linux worker. Okay, so that's complete. Now we're going to make a deployment slot and we need to do that in the Azure portal. I'll select the resource group that we just created. And there's two resources in there right now. We've got the app service and the app service plan. So we can check the app service plan is correctly set up. It needs to be using that premium SKU, and yes, it is. So that's all good. So we'll just hop back into the resource group and then we'll go into the app service web app. Okay, so if we have a look in the deployment slots under deployment, okay, so there's no slots at this stage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the first slot, which will be the staging deployment slot. So let's do that right now. So you need to select add and put in a name. So I'm going to call this staging. And I don't need to clone any settings. So let's add that. Okay, that's been created now. So you can see there's two slots here. The first one is the production slot. You get that by default. And then you've got the staging slot, which we just created. So what we can do is we can check out the different URLs here. So if I go into that staging deployment slot and load that up. So this is an app service slot resource, and I'll be able to get the domain for this resource shortly. And you can see it's got hyphen staging after the first part of the URL. So if we check that out, and what we can see here is just it's the default Microsoft Azure web page for a Node.js application. If we want to check out the production environment, we can just go back into the resource group and select the app service for the production slot. And we can check out that URL now. And yes, that looks the same as what we have for the staging environment. So the deployment slot has been set up. Next, what we want to do is we want to create environment variables in the Azure portal and have them as deployment slot specific settings. So the way that the web app will work is we'll be printing out an environment variable in the Express server that will return in the web browser. And we're going to use that environment variable to say whether the environment is staging or if it's a production environment. So we'll need to go into the deployment slot settings in Azure portal and add some environment variables in there, one for each deployment slot. So let's do that now. So we'll start with the production environment. So we'll go into environment variables. Under app settings, we'll add an environment variable. I'll call it environment. And this will be the production environment. And I'll mark this as a deployment slot setting. So this environment variable is always tied to this particular slot. So it's always going to say the same. It's bound to that slot. So I'm going to apply that. That will trigger a restart. So I'm going to do the same thing to the staging slot, but I'm going to set a different value for the environment variable. So in the environment variables, under app settings, I'm going to add a new variable. It's also going to be called environment. And I'm going to call this staging. And it will also be bound to this deployment slot. Let's apply that now. Next, we're going to deploy the web app. We're not going to deploy it directly to production. We're going to deploy it to the staging slot. That way we can deploy it to the staging slot, check it out, see if it's working correctly on the staging slot. If we're comfortable with it and it's meeting our expectations, then we can swap that into the production slot. That way, if there's an issue, we can always revert back and have the previous version of production there as well. So there's two files here, index.js and package.json. So let's get this deployed into the staging deployment slot. We'll do that now. Make sure to do an npm install first, because we'll need those dependencies in there, because that's going to be part of the deployment. We want to deploy the application with all the dependencies that it requires, so it just needs that express.js dependency. So next we're going to create a zip file of the deployment, because we're going to deploy using AZ web app deploy, and that allows you to select a zip file. So I'll create that zip file now for the deployment. Okay, so that's all been placed into a zip file now. Next, I'll use the AZ web app deploy command to deploy this. So there's some extra parameters there as well. We've got the resource group, we've got the name of the web application, we've got the slot, which is going to be staging, and we've got a source path, which is the path to the deployment zip file, and the type, which is of type zip. So that's just deploying now into the staging slot, so we'll wait for that to complete and then move on with the tutorial. So that should be successful now. So I'll just check out the staging URL, and we should see the changes in there. So it says hello world from staging. So it's taking that staging from the environment variable we set on the staging deployment slot. So that's working very good. And if we want to just have a look quickly at the production deployment slot again, it's still got this default Microsoft Azure page for Node.js. So that's as expected, because we haven't pushed anything to production yet. So that's what we'll do now. We will swap what's in the staging slot with what is in the production slot. We'll do that now. So to do that, we need to go into the deployment slots again. So under deployment slots, this is under the App Service web app. And from there, we're going to select the swap button. And what is the source? So we're going from staging and we're pushing that into production. So these are the changes that are going to be made. So let's start the swap now. So it looks like that is successful now. So let's test it out. If we check the staging first, this should be the default Node.js application, which is correct. So it's been successfully swapped with what was in the production slot. Now, if we check the production slot, let's have a look what it is. And it's not saying hello world from staging, it's saying hello world from production. Now, that's exactly what we expect, because it's pulling the value for production here from the environment variable, which was bound to that deployment slot. So that is working as expected. Now, say there was an issue here and we actually needed to revert this change or roll it back. So we can do that again by just actually doing the swap again. We're going to move the staging back into production. So that will be the source, that will be the target, and then we can hit start swap again, and it's just going to swap them again for us. Okay, so that is marked as complete now. So let's start by refreshing the staging environment. So this should say hello world from staging. Okay, so it is saying hello world from staging. And if we check out the production environment, so it used to say hello world from production, now it should be that default Node.js page. That's how you roll back a change using deployment slots. So imagine a scenario where we had to roll it back and then we had to do a change, make a code fix, and then we want to then release that code fix into production. You would make the code change to fix the issue, and then you would deploy that to the staging environment, not the production environment. So you want your fixes to go to the staging environment first, so then you can swap it over to production from there. So let's make that fix now. So this is the new code I'm going to put into the index.js file. It's got an extra bit of text there saying all fixed in that message that it sends back from the server. So let's just copy that over now. So I'll make another deployment.zip. Okay, so now we want to deploy this. And we're using the web app deploy command, and we're specifying the slot as the staging slot. If that deployment has been successful in the staging slot, we should see this message, hello world from staging, all fixed. So let's refresh the staging environment now. And yes, we do see hello world from staging, all fixed. And if we refresh the production environment, there should be no change here. And that's also the case. So now what we want to do is deploy the changes that have been made in the staging environment into the production environment. And we can do that by using, by swapping the deployment slots again from staging into production. So let's do that now. So let's do the swap now. And the source is staging and the target is production. Let's start the swap. Okay, so this is marked as successful. So check out the staging slot. We should see the default Node.js sample page. Yes, that's correct. And if we check in the production slot, we should see that message saying all fixed from production. Here we go, hello world from production, all fixed. If you finish with this tutorial, make sure you delete all those resources by removing the resource group with an AZ group delete command. And that's how you can use deployment slots in Azure App Service. If you found this useful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.